Welcome to Career Coffee Chat Live. I'm your host, Erin Urban. I'm a certified executive coach, and what I do is I help emerging and evolving leaders remove roadblocks so you can advance your career and gain more influence, income, and impact. And speaking of influence, today and impact, we will be talking about clearly speaking with Lynda Stucky. I'm super excited to have her on the show today because here's the deal. Your success and your credibility is driven by you, but it is not determined by you. It is determined by other people. Ooh, this was a hard concept for me to absorb and actually bring into my person and my being and accept as a young professional. But it's very true. So, what does that mean? Well, that means how you show up, how you comport yourself, your behaviors, how you sound, how you look, and what actions you take define your credibility with other people. However, you drive that, but you don't necessarily say, okay, this person is a fun person to be with, or this person is not a fun person to be with, or this person is a great speaker, or this person is not a great speaker. That's not up to you. That's up to other people. So it's all about that first impression. And it is so important when it comes to elevating your career. So this is why I'm extremely excited to have Lynda on the show today, because she is the master of elevating your speaking, how you present yourself, particularly around how you say what you say and how you align your verbalizations with your brand. So I want to welcome you to the show. Come on in, pull up a seat, say hi, say where you're from. Don't be shy. Please feel free to ask your questions, have comments, put them all in the chat because we want to make sure that you are included, seen, and heard. So I want to welcome you to the show. Come on in and say hi, say where you're from, say your name. I'd love to see you and hear you and have you be a part of the conversation. So let's learn a little bit about Lynda because this is, by the way, not just for executives, this is for anybody. So if you want to elevate this, learning how to clearly speak, which is easy for me to say because half the time I'm like, blah, 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 blah. But it's critical for your career advancement. For one, being taken more seriously and you can make more impact at your work. You can avoid idioms and colloquialisms that we're all guilty of. I know I am. That distances diverse audiences and discover straightforward tactics to elevate your speaking abilities and most importantly your presence as a person. So if you are have a nagging suspicion that people aren't taking you seriously or maybe they're um, not seeing you the way you want to be seen, well, this is a show for you because Lynda Stucky is a coach, author, and speaker, and she is committed to helping mid and senior level executives and leaders reach their potential and align the way they sound with their professional values and roles. She teaches executives how to use their speech, language, and voice effectively to establish credibility, position themselves within their company and externally with their networks, as well as enhance their reputation as a topic authority. Without further ado, I'd love to welcome Lynda to the show. Lynda, it's such a pleasure to have you.
Oh, thank you, Erin. It's so good to see you. It really is.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. For those of you who are just tuning in, I want to say hi to Cornisha. She's tuning in from the Woodlands, Texas. For those of you who are just tuning in, I want to say we've been looking forward to the show for like, what is it now, a month or two?
Yes. And, and do your listeners know why how we got
Oh, but
together?
wait, there's more.
That's so true.
So here we are. We're in Alaska. So I met Lynda in Alaska. We took a quick trip to Alaska. Quick, I say, because Alaska's a big state, to be fair. So it takes a lot of time to see it. But took a quick trip to Alaska in September, late August and September, 1st of September. And Lynda was a part of a small tour that we had. We're touring the Alaskan range by bike, hiking, and by boat. We're doing some paddling as well. So she was a part of that group. And on the first day, in fact, I sat next to her. I was like, oh, learning a little bit about her. And she's, oh, this is what I do. I help executives articulate better and elevate their presence. I was like, oh, I have to have you on the show.
Yeah, it was so funny that you and I were there together sitting together for the first day, right, and started talking about all of our backgrounds and stuff. So I was also very amazed.
Oh,
It's
well,
cool.
I'm just so glad that situations worked out and we were able to connect. Most importantly, have you on the show today.
Yeah.
And I would love for you to share with those people who are tuning in now or tuning in later to either the replay or the podcast. What is it that sparked you to really focus on this particular aspect of the coaching work that you do? Because I know you have a rich background in speech pathology, et cetera. But what does that evolution look like for you?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as a speech pathologist, I was always interested in helping others communicate to their very best potential, just to maximize their communication skills, whether I was working in a hospital or at a school, in a school system. But the work that I do now with executive leaders is incredibly satisfying just because of the quick transformation they feel as they improve their communication skills and their increased self-confidence that they receive or they feel that they get after working on a skill elevates them in such a way and gives them the determination to do more. And quite frankly, working with executives, it's a whole different population of people compared to elderly people, for example, in the hospitals or
Mhm.
children in schools, which I loved also. But this is just like a different population that has so much more. Um, I don't know. They're just really intelligent. They're interesting, and they are climbing the career path. They are
Mhm.
moving up, and they just want to do the best they can. So it's been a great, great way to learn about people and help them.
Yeah, help them elevate their impact and their influence for sure, because that's what it's
Absolutely.
all about. And
Yeah.
for those of you tuning in now or later, we were watching the podcast or the replay. By the way, if you are watching later on in podcast replay, we will get your comments. So just because we're not quote unquote live at that moment doesn't mean we won't see what you have to say. So feel free to add your comments in the comments section and we
Mhm.
will get back to you. But most importantly, Lynda, it was interesting that you mentioned, elevating and bringing up that I think what you're maybe thinking about is that drive, right? What they're able to actually take from the skills and the techniques that you teach them, what they're able to do with that is
Mhm.
very transformational for them, and
Mhm.
you're seeing that growth and that gratitude and development. That's so exciting, right? And that's one reason I do what I do too, because
I
seeing
know.
transformation is wonderful, and being able to see them make greater impact and have more influence in their lives is fantastic. Now,
Yeah.
share with me a little bit, if you don't mind, when you're working with people and they're not maybe getting the results they like to see as a outgrowth of their verbal articulation, what are some things that you look for in your line of work that says, okay, well, maybe these are some areas, or maybe some common areas people normally need to work on other than accent modification?
So I have a list of 12 different speech, language, and voice skills that all
Hmm.
contribute to our sound. And for example, under the umbrella of voice, you would have your loudness level, your pitch, you'd have intonation and inflection, you'd
Hmm.
have the quality of your voice. These are all things that kind of fall underneath our voice. And by the way, any of these things that I'm talking about can be manipulated to a certain degree to change, to get more of, to take, to have less of.
Hmm.
And that's what I work on. When we discover somebody has too much of something or too little of something, then we do the coaching to help them get that. Get that. The under the umbrella of speech are things like your rate, how fast you
Hmm.
speak, your pronunciation and diction. It could be I'm blanking for right now. Let's go to language, because language has to do with the vocabulary that you use. It has to do with how concisely you speak. And that's a
Hmm.
huge one, Erin, because some of the people that I work with who are executives and they're climbing the corporate ladder, they are now in new roles as
Right.
as they move up. They discover that their communication that was worked for them earlier in their career no longer works for them as they move up. For example, they might have more public speaking, or they might be doing presenting before a board, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so that communication then is completely different audiences. So they need to adapt to the way in which they speak to those audiences to craft the messages that are relevant to whomever they're speaking. And this can be really, really tough for somebody who's very, I'll say analytic, who likes details, who likes to
Oh,
get
yeah.
in the weeds with how things were done. Then they're elevated to a different level and they now have to make, a lot of people don't care. Maybe a board doesn't want to hear all the details, how they arrived at some conclusion. And so now they have to learn how to craft a message that's very concise.
Tighten that up.
Yeah, and it's that's actually one of the biggest areas that I work on is just crafting messages that speak to certain audiences.
Right. Yeah. I get that a lot, particularly with the emerging and evolving leaders that I coach, because at that band, when you are either newly a leader or let's just say you want to move up in the ranks, you're absolutely right. The behaviors and actions that got you here may not get you there.
Exactly.
So it requires a paradigm shift, a new level of understanding, and being able to let go of some perhaps behavioral baggage that we've been holding on to consciously or unconsciously, and being able to make that shift, and particularly how we show up. And now it's not that we have to change who we are.
Right, right. Yeah,
That's
one example I have is a woman who was very smart, very intelligent, and was doing well in her job. So she was constantly getting promoted, but she had a fear of public speaking.
mm,
And of course, if you can't speak publicly, that's kind of a career stopper for you. And she was terrified of it. It almost was immobilizing for her.
yeah,
And so what it did, it manifested in her voice, and her rate of speech was, 100 miles per hour. And so by working on some of those things, she was able to slow her rate of speech. She was much more interesting to listen to.
mm,
And yeah, but it took practice because that was not something that she enjoyed or wanted to do in the first place. But she was drawn there because of her promotion.
right, right.
Yeah.
And there are times, another, when I coach leaders, we often talk about your energy zone. So how you show up and how you show up naturally versus some areas that may drain your energy. Literally
Mhm.
afterwards, you may feel exhausted.
Yeah.
And for this lady, it sounds like probably, even though she was able to show up much better thanks to your adept coaching, afterwards she was really,
She was what?
she was just tired. She was
Yeah, right.
exhausted afterwards.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
uh,
Yes.
it's just not something. I mean, take my husband for example. He's very much an introvert. However, he is also extremely articulate in his subject that he is interested in, and
Hmm.
is a wonderful orator. However, afterwards, he needs space because
Hmm.
he is completely exhausted,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And that's normal. But
Yeah.
it's interesting because I have also worked on my speech. I know it doesn't maybe sound like it, but quite a bit. Historically, my way of speaking was much faster, much more slurred. I still have to focus on enunciation because I'll tend to
Hmm.
mumble words together and slur all and blah, blah, blah. And I can
Hmm.
mumble mouth, right? That's the way I grew up speaking, and also with a very distinct Southern accent. To the
Hmm.
point where when I graduated college, I was convinced that I could never work any further north than maybe Georgia
Oh.
because no one would take me seriously.
Uh-huh.
And it's not that I couldn't do it or I wasn't adept or wasn't,
Mm.
able. It's just how I sounded created an impression that would go against my IQ, if you would. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
it's not because any of this, by the way, is based in fact. At
It's
no time,
perception.
I think, does anybody say, "Oh, well, you have an accent, or perhaps you mumble words together, or say, too much." It does not necessarily logically equal that you're not capable as a leader or have a high IQ. Nothing
Mhm.
to do with one another.
Yes.
And
Mhm. That's so right. It's the perception. It's not
Mhm.
necessarily the actual who you are, what you are. And you bring up some interesting things that I work with. Reducing distractions is so important
Mhm.
because once, like you were talking about the you knows or ums, when that's really, I mean, those are easy to do. Those are
Right.
easy things to bring into conversation. But if you have a distraction like that, and if it's happening a lot, people start concentrating or focusing on that distraction. And once they're focusing on that distraction, they're no longer listening to
Mhm.
you. And once they're no longer listening to you, you're not credible anymore because you just shut that all down. So reducing distractions, like what you were just talking about, is a huge help to people to make them more credible.
Absolutely. Now, I have some clients that they're a little bit quiet, let's just say. And
Hmm.
I have to elevate my voice. I go into speaker voice, right? I have to elevate that because normally how I articulate is very low tone. The more nasal tone to my voice, and it can be very low and very, very subtle. It can be hard to hear.
Mm.
Well, if I continue to do that and don't elevate my or project more, then perhaps my ideas aren't taken seriously or I'm not heard well,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Yes.
for those people who may have a softer tone of voice, Linda, what would your recommendation be? How could they maybe shift that a little bit in a way that's comfortable for them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a couple of strategies that a person can use to do that. One of them is to make sure that you have good breath support. Now, let's say you're really nervous. You're like my client that I was telling you about who gets nervous before the presentation. She is not using good breath support because, as you know, sometimes when we are nervous, we just kind of let go and we get tense. So she wasn't using good breath support. And learning
Mhm.
to relax and then be able to take that breath and be able to use it for a good, solid voice is one way to do that.
Hmm.
Another way, and that breathing is behind everything. So, good breath support is an absolute must to have a good, strong voice.
Mhm.
But another thing you can do, and I love this little trick, the trick is to pretend that you are from your vocal cords to your mouth. It's like a megaphone. And as you know, with a megaphone, that increases your loudness. So I ask my clients to really exaggerate their mouth movements and try to make the space in front of their mouth, the end of that megaphone, as big and wide as possible, so that the sound that's coming up from your vocal cords is bouncing off all those bony spaces in your mouth and allows that sound to just really expand and go out really well.
Hmm.
Now, the beautiful thing about this trick is that if you do this, if you are using exaggerated mouth movements when you speak, it's hard to talk fast. You're going to have much better diction. You're going to have a really beautiful resonance, and resonance has to do, you were talking about nasality before.
Mhm.
Nasality is increased if we keep our mouth really closed like this because there's no place for the air to go. It just kind of comes through our nose.
Hmm.
But if I open my mouth really widely and I speak, the air is coming out of my mouth. And so my resonance is deeper and richer. So this one trick really benefits many different areas of speech and voice. And I love it because of that. I love to kill a bird. No, I don't like to kill birds. I like to kill.
Let's call it colloquialism.
Right, right. Oh, yes. Let's talk about that. But yes, that you do one thing and it benefits many things. So that's a great little trick.
Has multiple areas of value.
It
See,
does.
and that I think you just coached me, Linda. I
Oh,
probably need to hire you actually because I am not good at opening my mouth to talk.
yeah,
I just keep my mouth kind of tight, and I've
right.
noticed that about myself, and I try to do my best to change it within reason because I don't want to look like a weirdo.
Yeah. But you don't though. That's the thing. There's some broadcasters who really use their mouth when they speak. Um, I'm thinking of somebody, Savannah Guthrie. She's on, maybe, I'm not sure which news channel, but she really uses her mouth and it just looks natural. And I'm
Mhm.
trying to use it right now, and I don't think that it looks unnatural necessarily. It's just getting used to that feeling. If you're like this all the time, you can hear that my voice just doesn't carry nearly as well as
Yeah, you're absolutely right.
if I
Mhm.
really open my mouth and talk a little bit with more exaggerated mouth movements. So I
Right.
call it the megaphone trick, and I highly recommend
Awesome.
it.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you so much for sharing that because I know, and for those of you tuning in now or later, please don't be shy. Speak up if this is something that you maybe struggle with. And if there's anything else, maybe you feel like, okay, well, I say too much, or I have to mean filler
Mhm.
words, or
Mhm.
perhaps I'm not being taken the way I would like to be taken when I am speaking with other people. It's not necessarily presentations or public speaking, but if it's any instance where you're trying to articulate a concept and you notice that in some situations, repeatedly, it tends not to quite come through the way you would like it to.
Mhm.
Feel free to pop your questions in the chat.
Yes.
We're here to help you. That's what this is all about. That's why we have the Career Coffee Chat show.
Yeah. So I want to say something about that. Um, what a person can do is you have to have awareness. That is really the very first step. And I guess you said there's awareness that maybe I'm not getting my message across. That's my first awareness. But then you have to ask yourself, well, why? And maybe the first thing you need to do is listen to yourself to have the awareness of what's going on. So, and there's three ways you can do that. You can actually record yourself or listen to your phone message, and just ask yourself some questions about your own voice. Do I like this voice? Would I like listening to this voice? Do I like the way I talk? What is good about it, and maybe what could change. And a lot of people find this so humiliating because they can't stand the way they sound on a recording.
Nobody can.
So, right. So if it's too humiliating, then you can ask somebody. Go to a colleague who you trust and just ask them if what they notice about your voice, and see if they'll give you some feedback about that. And if that's too humiliating, you can also hire somebody, of course, and get them to give their opinion. And so, yeah, that awareness, you can't change any behavior unless you are aware that something exists.
That's very
And
true. We can't
that's
grow
so
what we don't know.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. So some people don't realize that maybe they're using tons of word fillers, or maybe there's something about their voice that is not appealing, or the southern accent that you were talking about, maybe that's interfering. So yeah, there has to be awareness is the
Mhm.
first step.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you also hit on something earlier that I would love to expand upon a little bit
Mhm.
because I often coach people who do like to dive into the details, maybe a little bit more than their executives would appreciate,
Yeah.
and becoming more succinct, delivering a concise and pointed message
Mhm.
in a professional way
Right.
while not leaving out, obviously, the important bits is
Yes.
really important for a lot of
Mhm.
these individuals, whether they be a leader or manager or not. This is
Mhm.
an important skill to have because oftentimes it will put you on the track
Yes.
to being a leader or a manager of people. So, what are some tips if it's something you can share? If it's something that doesn't require a PowerPoint, then take out all this because oftentimes what I see is the PowerPoint.
Yes.
And you know where I'm going when I went through all the words. It's like, okay, how about a picture and 3 lines of text, no more? And they're like,
Yeah.
yes, you can speak to your slide because you're an expert. You don't have to have PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to tell people with the PowerPoint that if you have that much text, then they're going to be reading the text and they're not going to be paying attention to you. So if you can keep your slides to something that supplements your message, and let them listen to you and sort of put together what it is you are saying with that 3 lines that you're talking about, that's so much better. So much better.
Mhm.
But yeah, conciseness is a good one because it really requires a person to understand their audience. And there's a whole process of learning about your audience so that when you go and try to convince them or market to them, you want to make it about them. You want to, there might be 10 reasons why you should be falling into my idea that I have, but this person doesn't care about probably 9 of those things. There's maybe one thing that they really are interested in. And so being able to craft a message around that person's interests and what's relevant to them is very, very important. And leaving all that other stuff out, making it so that it's a much more concise marketing, or it's a much more concise message, and so much more relevant to the audience. So the audience, knowing your audience is absolutely necessary to make those changes in your speech and make it concise as well.
That's very important because each executive board or each group of leaders or what have you, they have a different flavor, if you will.
Yes.
What they want to see, what they don't want to see. Some of them are very critical, and some of them are quite detailed, and they actually would like more information. So perhaps your PowerPoint isn't death by PowerPoint, but you can certainly hand out more information to them physically, then they can read it or not as their pleasure, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Or ask questions or not. So you haven't wasted their time. You haven't wasted your time and or their time by giving them too much information. They can ask. And if you're ready, you're prepared because you know so much about your topic. But let them ask the question as opposed to assume that they don't know or that they care.
That's gold. Right there.
Yeah.
I don't care who you are, that is golden right there. Let them ask. Don't assume that they need to know all the things.
Right.
Let them ask because they will.
Yeah. Right.
They didn't get there because they were necessarily shy wallflowers, usually. And sometimes they may come to your office later or ring you on the phone or do a chat or what have you is appropriate to your work environment. And that's fine too.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I wanted to, is there something in the chat right now or no?
Not right now, but for anybody tuning in, don't be shy. Say hi, say where you're from. And if you're watching the show later, like I've said before, we will see your message. And not in a weird stalky way. We want to help you kind of way. Cornelia says, I do find conciseness to be an issue for her. So she probably really appreciates your insights on being more concise. Is there any other tips you can give Cornelia? And Cornelia, if you don't mind, give us an example of where you might leverage this skill so we'll know how to help you more explicitly. And that will help you, Lynda, help Cornelia get a little bit more of a handle on, okay, how can I deliver more complex message in a way it's received.
Well, one thing, and I'll let her write that up, but one thing I think is really important is to restrict the number of points you want to make to 3 and don't go above that. So if you go above that, no matter what the topic is, that's too many. We kind of handle a group of 3 pretty well. And the temptation is to give 5 things, but no, it's just 3. Just hang on to 3 things.
Right.
Yeah. So the other thing is to really make it about them, as I already stated, that they're going to want to do something because it appeals to them and not to me. And what's important to me may not be as important to them. So you have to make it about them. And I always think it's always important to have a call to action. Be prepared. Oh, I also like to have a hook, no matter what. Sort of come in with something interesting that wants them to listen to you in the first place. And you can start with a statistic, or you can start with a quote, or you could start, a little anecdote, something that draws them in immediately to make your points. And it's hard to do that when you are doing a Q&A, for example, but you can prepare for it in other situations. So you can actually prepare for that in a Q&A as well, but it is a little bit more difficult.
Right. If you're doing a report out, which is oftentimes not necessarily as exciting as, say, a marketing pitch or something you're trying to gain buy-in from your key stakeholders, if you're doing a report out, you can still lead into it with interest.
Oh,
So maybe it's
yes.
something that's of value to those key stakeholders in the room that you know is valuable to them, and
Right.
leading in with that. So you, quote unquote, got them on the hook immediately.
Yes.
And you know your audience best. Sometimes if I know my audience is concise in their questioning and they don't ramble on forever, then I will open it up to have those, just a general idea. Okay, this is the idea. Then allow them to do Q&A. Or
Mhm.
if I know someone may take this and then run with it because they have an agenda,
Right.
and I want to manage that agenda and manage the message that I'm delivering and making sure that it's not being misconstrued based on someone else's agenda, I will take more control of the information I'm presenting. So
Mhm.
just know, again, like Lynda said, know your stakeholders. Now she said, Cornisha, I'm trying to pitch software selections to management and increase accuracy and make my job easier.
Hmm.
What's the value to your management? Increasing accuracy. So what's their pain point? If they don't change the software, what are they experiencing that is a pain point for them? And how can you make them look good?
Mhm.
How would
Well,
this
that
look to
often
them?
is. That is true. That is often what's important to them is, and it doesn't. Maybe sometimes it's the bottom line, of course, but sometimes it is making them look good. Maybe, yeah. There's usually a bottom line thing is pretty common.
Yeah. Yeah. Understand what they're valuing and how they can benefit.
Yes.
I always approach it there first and almost never talk about how it's going to benefit me. It's
Oh,
always the
absolutely
benefit.
not.
Yeah, always the benefit to them,
Yes.
and let them ask the questions.
Yes.
So yeah, that's always how I encourage anyone to approach these kinds of conversations. And even if it's, let's just say yesterday I was talking to a gentleman who wants to move up within his organization,
Uh-huh.
and he's getting his opportunity to talk to the new leadership, the executive vice president of his business unit, and he wants to gain more leadership, actual leadership. He's influentially leader, and he's known as kind of the go-to for the group, and he does a lot of administrative leadership type tasks without the title. It's like, okay, now's the time to have the conversation. He goes, but how do I have that conversation without sounding pushy? What are
Make
they
it about
valuing?
them.
Yeah, make it about them. Make it about them. What is your primary goal? What do you want to accomplish? What initiatives do you want to drive? And
Mhm.
how do you see me adding value?
Mhm.
Let them make the decision. Anyway, I
Mhm.
digress. Deanna from Chicago says, hi, I'm from Chicago. Good information, as I am a person who talks very fast.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, yeah. So what are top tips for Deanna?
Okay, so go back to that exaggerated mouth movements. That's one thing that will slow you down, way down. So I would start there. And it's really hard to talk really fast if you're really trying to exaggerate your mouth movements. You just can't do it. It's hard.
Yeah, it looks weird too.
It looks really weird. Good point. I'm glad you share that. So that's one thing. So the other thing is being relaxed. So oftentimes when people are really nervous, and I'm not sure, Deanna, if you are, it was Deanna, right?
Deanna.
Okay,
Deanna from
Deanna. I'm not
Chicago.
sure if you're nervous and that's when it kind of comes out. And if it does, then you can take some nice deep breaths. You really learn to relax. A lot of people think of breathing between sentences. Like that's the way that they stop speaking so quickly. They're going to just take some breaths between their sentences. Slow down, take that breath, start again. Then take another breath and start again. So that's another way, that's another something that you can do to help you. So the breath, exaggerated mouth movements, relaxing, those are all great things that you can do.
Yeah, and I don't know if it fits into what you're professional, because you're a professional. I'm not. I just figured this thing out.
Yes.
I went to Toastmasters. Toastmasters helped me tremendously,
Oh, yes.
particularly when it came to impromptu speaking.
Yes, for
And
sure.
I noticed that when you have to think and speak, speaking really fast does not help.
You're right.
Because you get to the end of thinking and then you'll be and you don't want those filler words. So in
Yes.
order to think and speak, I had to slow down,
Hmm.
enunciate,
Right.
and give myself and pause, intentionally pause
Yeah.
to give myself time for my brain to think of what I'm going to say next. And it also helped me be more concise in my message.
Hmm.
And I would find that I could preempt the blah, 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 let me go off on this rabbit trail and talk. I wouldn't do that because I was breathing as I was speaking.
Hmm.
Lynda, is that effective?
Oh, yeah, that's perfect. That's really great. I want you to think about, and maybe your audience too, to think about perceptions that you have of somebody who speaks really quickly. Do you have something like, if I'm talking to you really, really quickly, what kind of perception do you have of that kind of person?
Impatient, doesn't have
Impatient.
time for me,
Hmm.
maybe drank too many cups of coffee this morning.
Uh-huh. Sometimes nervous. Do you get
Nervous,
the impression
perhaps,
that you might
right?
be nervous? Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's the kind of thing that I talk about actually in my book, which is voice branding for
Yeah,
executive.
hold that thing up
Yeah,
here.
I'll
Let's see
hold
the
it up.
book. Let's see the book.
So I take, am I up there right in the middle there? Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I take all the elements of our speech, language, and voice, and I put them on a continuum. And if you have too much of something versus not enough of something, what are the perceptions that you have?
Mm.
So I'll put you on the spot, Aaron, and put you at the other end of if somebody speaks too slowly, and I mean really, really slowly, do you have a perception of that person?
It doesn't happen as often as you would think, but occasionally in my life, I have run across someone who does speak quite slowly.
Hmm.
And it's almost like, well, I have a different, maybe I'm not the right person to ask for this because I feel like they're very deliberate.
Hmm.
Like they're doing a lot of thinking before
Hmm.
they say anything.
Right.
Now, if they just talk like this the whole time, then I might think maybe they're slow.
Hmm.
That's not a PC word to use. I know. Don't kill
Well,
me.
it's a perception. That's all. It's just a perception, right? It's not necessarily their actual. They could be very deliberate, like
Mhm.
you said before. They have a deliberate way about them. They could sound thoughtful, but it could also be that they sound too slow, and too slow maybe sounds uneducated, or like you said, it's just not, they're slow thinking, and that's just a perception.
Mhm.
And to your point at the very beginning, you said the perceptions are what other people have of you. What I like to do in my line of work is to get people to think about how they would like to be perceived, how they would like to come to the table, and think about whatever word that is. I have a worksheet that I do with my audiences when I go speak. Well, actually, with all my clients too. And they choose 10 different words of how they would like to come to the table and be perceived. And it's words like confidence or competent. Sometimes it's
Mhm.
authoritative. Sometimes it's something else. And I'll just for a second I'll say, there's some of my clients who want to be more authoritative. And then you have other clients who want to be softer, that like they have a more soft sound to them. So it's not the same for everybody. It's not like we all want to come across the same way. But in that, then, how, with those 12 characteristics of speech, language, and voice, which one of those is maybe misaligned with
Mhm.
the area that you want to be? So if somebody does say to me, I want to be self-confident, that's really important to me. That's how I want to show up. And they are using a too soft of a voice, or
Mhm.
maybe they're using uptalk, and when they say something, they sound like they're asking a question.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound confident. It sounds like they are much more, I don't know, doubtful, or they don't feel self-confident about what they're saying,
Mm-hmm.
or they're doing something else. So maybe the fast speech. So it's like that alignment with how you want to come to the table, and what does that sound like, and making sure that that person sounds like the person that they want to be, the role that they are in. And
Right.
that's so important. And then it's authentic, because it's their choice. It's their choice of choosing how they want to come to the table, and then trying to add the elements of look, sound, nonverbals, or whatever to that, to make them that way, to help them
Right.
become that way.
Yeah, that is so powerful.
Hmm.
Because here's what we mentioned before. It's not like you are becoming someone you're not.
Yes.
And in fact, you're becoming more the person you actually are because you're making sure that the brand you're perceived as is in alignment with what's going on inside. Like
Yeah.
you're basically aligning your inside with your outside.
Yeah. Yes.
And it's a really beautiful thing.
It is. And I find that some people don't realize that they are doing some things that are not contributing positively to how they want to be. Or maybe they do know about something, but they don't think that they can change. They
Mhm.
just, or they don't know how. They don't know
Right.
how to change, or they don't think that they can. So, or that, like, I was just born this way. This is my voice. This is how I've
This is just
always talked.
me. I can't do anything about it. This is who I am. Well,
Exactly.
actually, you have a lot more impact than you realize.
Yes, and you can change some things about it if it's not coming across in the way in which you want it to.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's pretty cool
absolutely.
stuff. Yeah,
Absolutely. I
yeah.
know I've had to myself.
Mhm.
I've had to make shifts.
Mhm.
And in fact, because my family, my mother just recently moved near us. We moved her to Texas this past year.
Ah.
And because you really, I mean, not that we haven't spoken the phone. We've spoken the phone quite a bit. I mean,
Mhm.
all the time, like every other day, pretty much. However, she hasn't been around me in person as much. And apparently, maybe I speak a little bit differently in person, but I'll often speak and pause intentionally before I
Mhm.
continue. And everybody interrupts me.
Oh.
They're like,
Oh.
oh, you have a pause. Let me leap into that pause.
Oh,
I
yes.
wasn't done.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah. So that comes up a lot for me, Aaron, or not for me, but like my clients say that, like,
Mhm.
we are so fast moving. People are just, it's the second that there is a pause, somebody else jumps in, and they don't get to say what they want to say. One thing you can do is you can state how many points you want to make. So if you're going to talk to whomever and you're going to say, I have 3 things to say about that. Number one, da 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 da. And then you can pause after number one. Number two, it gives them at least a heads up that there's more information coming.
Mm.
So don't you jump in. Yeah, exactly.
Right. Instead of saying, I wasn't finished.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, you're giving them a little bit of a heads up,
Yeah,
and
that's a good point. That's a very good
mhm,
point.
mhm.
Framing, right?
It's framing it a little
How
bit.
you need
That's
to
correct.
show up. Now, does anybody else have tuning in either now or later have any questions about maybe something you're struggling with right now, or maybe it's something you think, oh, there's just no way I can possibly change whatever that is.
Mhm.
While you're thinking about that, I would, Linda, if you don't mind, give us an example of uptalk because I'm pretty sure I know what you mean by that. And it's a
Yes.
relatively, I wouldn't say new phenomenon, but it has evolved over the past 15 or so years to be more common. And I'm noticing that now, and particularly women, not
Mhm.
just women, but particularly
Mhm.
women
Yeah.
that want to be seen a certain way, however, coming across maybe unconsciously
Yes.
otherwise.
So there are actually 2 areas of speech and voice that I found more common in women, and that's one of them. But it also happens with men, and it happens
Mhm.
across all ages, but more commonly with women. And the example of it is, I'll do it right now. I'll say, we're in this show right now, and we are talking about uptalk, And do you hear how my inflection goes up? Like I'm asking a question. My pitch goes up at the end of my sentence. Do you hear
Like
it?
last week, I
Yeah.
was riding my bike and it goes up at the end. It's always up, 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 up.
Yes. Yes. That's called uptalk. And a lot of people, if you kind of think about your perceptions about how that comes across, what do you think? I mean, what is it that you feel when somebody does that?
Maybe they don't know. They're not sure.
They're not sure. They don't know.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The other one that I'll talk about is something called glottal fry. Do you know what glottal fry is? Have you ever heard of that?
Yes. I'm
Okay.
familiar, but I'm sure people would like to know more about that one.
Okay. So glottal fry is also a very common phenomenon, a trend, I'm not sure, that you hear in women where they kind of come down and they talk at the bottom of the range. And sometimes it could be, can you hear that? Sort of that scratchy sound at the bottom
Like,
of the
oh,
range.
like, well, this other day.
Yeah, yeah. It can be in the middle of a sentence, it can be at the end of a sentence. Somebody who uses it a lot would use it almost on every single word, and it would kind of come across like this. And you hear it, right? Okay. So that's called glottal fry or vocal fry, and it's really not very good for your vocal cords. So it's something that you don't want to use. But there's also perceptions associated with it. And maybe you have maybe have you heard it before? I'm sure you've heard
I
it.
have heard it before. Actually, there's someone I know that does this quite a bit.
Yeah.
And the typical, she will combine this also with the uptalk. So it's
Okay.
very interesting. And the conversation goes something like this. Well, the other day, I couldn't believe that this was going on. And I just, so it's just like this up and down and up. And it's like,
Yeah. You did that very well for imitating that. That was pretty good. So I would say the perception associated with that. Now, some people aren't even aware of it. I will bring this up sometimes at a presentation or something, and they'll say, I've never heard that before. And I know that they have because it's very, very prevalent. One of the perceptions associated with it is like the person is underwhelmed. It's like they're not using good breath support, so they're just kind of talking like this, and there's not a lot of energy in it. It's like being underwhelmed as opposed to enthusiastic,
apathetic,
yeah,
not engaged.
Yes, not engaged. So it's really quite, for me especially, I'm a speech pathologist, so this one is hard for me to listen to and hear. But it, just as you said, it has that perception, and I work on that through breath support, just learning to end your sentences without coming down to that very spot, that very bottom of your range. And once they remove it, they are like, I can't believe that I used to do that, and I'm so glad I don't do that anymore. And it's a distraction. It's a big distraction.
It can be, absolutely. It can create a certain perception of you as the individual, which may not be supportive of your brand. Now, if that is the brand you want, go for it, sunshine.
Right.
Do whatever you like.
Right.
Again, maybe that's not the brand you want. So just being aware, again, as you pointed out earlier, Lynda, is so important to understanding where are you right now? What are these nuances in how I show up or how I articulate that I may need to shift? Again, it's not about being a new person. You're awesome as who you are. Just being able to let that shine much more clearly in how you show up. And that's what you do, which is beautiful, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fran Dreschler is somebody who gets away with glottal fry. If you can imagine her voice, she has a lot of nasality, and she also she uses a lot of that glottal fry. So to your point, she's made it work for her. Like it's something that's her brand. That's she's got a very distinctive voice and sound to her. She's very popular, and she does very well.
Her brand.
It's part of her brand, right? Exactly.
Absolutely. And again, It depends on where you want to be,
Exactly.
how you want to be perceived. But just know, again, that we drive our credibility, but we don't determine it. Other people do.
Yeah.
And being aware of that and being aware of the cultural expectations too within your organization. Now, this is something a lot of people don't want to hear. They want to hear, I need to be my authentic self no matter what. And people just need to accept me. And yes, there does need to be more diversity. And thank goodness we are having more diversity across many spectrums, neurodiversity, how you show up physically, what you look like, the music you listen to, all of that is now being more widely accepted. And know that we're a strong change cycle. So not everybody has gotten the memo. Right? So we still need to work in some older paradigms and understanding how we can navigate those situations based on, again, as you mentioned, Lynda, knowing your audience, knowing where you need to show up and what resonates to them. That's still true to you.
Right.
But also making the brand impression that you want.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So any other top tips, golden nuggets you'd like to share with us before we wrap up the show today?
Yeah, I guess the work that I do, you always have to try to find a substitute behavior. So if you're, for example, speaking too quickly, then you need your substitute behaviors to learn to slow down. And there's a few ways that you can do that, the breathing, whatever, the substitute behavior. But really, that's not so hard. It's not so hard to take a breath. It's not so hard to slow your speech down. The really, really hard part of anything that we do, like creating a new habit, is learning to practice, or practicing, I should say, and learning to remember to practice, because that's really where it's the hardest. So going from an old way to a new way requires a lot of thought and intention and effort. It just doesn't happen overnight just because you need to talk more slowly. It has to be an intentional process. And I often suggest, start with people at home. Like do it in really low stakes conversations and really get used to this new way of exaggerating your mouth movements. Just do it at home. And then start to incorporate it into other areas of your life, and then get to that high stakes conversation, which is the board meeting. If you've practiced a long time down here, then it's going to maybe become more automatic for you up here when you're in that high stakes conversation where you don't really want to have to be concentrating on a slower rate of speech or exaggerated mouth movements. You want to concentrate on the content and not have to do all these other things. So that practicing and remembering to practice is probably one of the most key elements of being able to change a habit. As you know, it takes that kind of intention and drive to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's to take some of the, I guess, significance out of any change is just to remember that a habit that you have now is there because it's repeated over time.
A long time, probably.
And new habits are created by repeating them.
Exactly.
And your brain will prune out old habits that you no longer use. So those neural pathways will eventually be pruned, and you will then have the new habit solely in place. So that's really cool that our minds can do that. It's called neuroplasticity, the ability to form new ways of being and thinking and having new ideas and new mindsets. So, Lynda, it's been a great pleasure having you on the show. It's been fantastic information. I just want all of you to know, whether you're tuning in now or later, that first of all, I hope you enjoyed the show as much as I did. I know some people tuning in. We want to thank you for your comments and your questions. And most importantly, know that this information is very valuable, no matter where you are in your career. Whether you just graduated college or you're thinking about going at any time in your development as a human being, these types of strategies are very important for you to evolve as a professional and as a person who wants to be in control of your perception. So if you care about that, then definitely. Lynda, how can they find you? I know you're on LinkedIn, of course.
Yes, please connect with me on LinkedIn and let me know that you saw me here. The other way would be to go to my site, which is clearly-speaking.com.
Clearly-speaking.com. So that's where you can find Lynda. And she's awesome, by the way. I'm not just saying that because I met her on a bus in Alaska. So it's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much for being here, Lynda. And for all of you tuning in, make sure you check out the podcast, of course. And until next time, my friends, keep elevating.
Thanks, Erin.